All right, welcome back to Module 9. Sorry, recover. All right, welcome back to Module 8. We're gonna start talking about JavaScript today. I'm Cullen once again. Right now, let's go ahead and get started with understanding JavaScript and coding essentials. This is really fun for me. This is some of my favorite stuff to talk about. We're gonna hit up objectives 4.1, manage and maintain JavaScript. More specifically, talk about what JavaScript is. Talk about functions and variables in JavaScript, and then just really quickly touch on jQuery and some other third-party libraries. We're going to talk about how to update the user interface with using JavaScript as well with Objective 4.2. More specifically, locating and accessing elements, listening and responding to events, and then also updating the content of elements. Some of the really cool things that you can do with JavaScript and HTML. All right, so we use JavaScript to build interactive applications. Speaking of Java and JavaScript are definitely not the same thing. Do not confuse those two things. So anyway, HTML5 and CSS3 are awesome for creating engaging, like beautiful websites, but they're not interactive without JavaScript. Right? We need that programming language and that programming power of JavaScript in order to make the wonderfully interactive and engaging websites that we view on a regular basis. JavaScript is a loosely typed scripting language that's interpreted by a browser. And loosely typed means it's not super rigid. You don't have to declare a bunch of file types and other things along those lines. I won't get too far into that programming jargon because it can definitely bog down all the wonderful things that we're doing here today. It's an entirely different course, in fact. But it changes how elements in an HTML document act and respond to user input. And so we use JavaScript to create scripts, these files that are essentially step-by-step instructions that tell a browser how to respond to events, like a user clicking a button. The file extension, by the way, for JavaScript files is